This is one of the most challenging builds I've taken on in quite some time. There are multiple moments I felt I bit off more than I could chew. Let's get into it. Hey guys, Matt here, and today's project is a little bit different than what I normally do. I typically forge out culinary kitchen knives, and that's what I've been focusing on for the past several years, but today I'm making a Tolkien-inspired elven fighting knife. I love Tolkien's work. Peter Jackson's movies are really good, although pretty much anything after The Return of the King I think is sort of hot garbage. But the books and the OG movies are pretty cool. So what I'm doing right now is getting my material ready for my Sanmai billet. I forged down my core steel, which is 1-inch round W1 tool steel, into a little rectangle because it'd be hard to take a round bar and put it in the middle of a Sanmai and have it go well. And also getting this, what was gonna be an axe, wrought iron body axe, but kind of turned out super ugly, so I'm repurposing it into the cladding. Forging in a public makerspace right now, and that kind of means whatever weather is happening outside is what I'm experiencing as well in the forge. Typically it's nothing too crazy, but this was exceptional weather.
Nice.
It turned into a bit of a flash flood here in a second. Thankfully the forge has a little covering and was able to stay lit, and I was able to continue working. It actually was really cool to work in this weather. I don't know why, it just felt epic to be swinging a hammer in. I'm getting the wrought iron forged down to an even thickness so that when I stack my billet up, I've got as much chance of success in the weld as possible.
One of the cool things about wrought iron is that there's no carbon in it. So you can water quench it without hurting the material in any way. And there's plenty of water today, so I'm gonna use a puddle.
Wrought iron is a really cool material. It's got a lot of impurities in it, so
Very dirty though.
whenever you etch it, it's got this crazy natural grain, and you really don't know what kind of pattern you're gonna have. There's a lot of variation in wrought iron. They don't make it anymore, so you've got to find it in different sources, and this wrought iron I found in an old wagon wheel. You can find wrought iron ship chains and anchors and stuff like that, or in this case a wagon wheel. And I actually found it here in Colorado. I was on a job site up in the mountains and found this old wagon wheel that was being thrown away, and I asked if I could take it and salvage the wrought iron, and they were totally cool with it. So I've got a huge stash of wrought iron now, and ended up being pretty good stuff. Some wrought iron has so many impurities in it that you really can't do much with it, but this has, or seems to have, just the right amount. So something else I'm doing in this video is showing you guys how many days it takes for me to finish this project. We're here into day 2. Day 1 I got my material ready for the billet, and day 2 I'm getting it welded together. And this white powder that you see me sprinkling on the surface of the billet is borax. It's called 20 Multein borax. You can get it at Walmart, and it's like a laundry detergent type stuff, but what it does for a blacksmith is melts onto the surface of the steel and in between those layers and prevents the surfaces from oxidizing. So anytime steel oxidizes, it's not going to weld. It's going to be a barrier to weld. Welding with flux like this is one way to get a lot of burns too. You got to clean the steel off, which you see me doing with the heavy-duty wire brush in between each heat. So basically anytime I'm done hammering, I scrape the steel off with that brush and try to get all the oxidation and nasty clumped up scale off of it from the flux. Now, I don't have a power hammer or a press at this forge, and so I'm doing everything by hand, which is totally possible. I'm using a kind of heavy hammer. It's like 4.5 or 5 pounds, and keeping the steel really hot. And since I'm forge welding, that makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, my arm is pretty fried, as you could see there in that previous clip. My goal was to get the billet to about drawn out to about 5/16 of an inch thick and get a little section for the tang forged down. And this is setting me up to get some bolsters forge welded on. This is material that I'm preparing for the bolsters, and it is also wrought iron. So I'm grinding the scale off of the blade and then also cutting the end of the blade off where the like MIG welds were, and kind of just like a nasty little like inclusion filled section was. And with my little wrought iron blocks all cleaned up, I'm tack welding them on, and I want them to overlap between the tang and the heel of the blade. Now, this powder that I'm saving is just dust from the wrought iron, and I mixed it into the flux, and it's going to be an aid in forge welding the bolsters on. Now, I honestly just didn't think of it when I was welding the whole billet up together in the first or second day, but it was really good thing I thought of it for this, because I'm not going to take as many welding heats for the bolster material. I don't want to forge it down very much at all. I just want to get it forge welded solid, and that's about it. And so that those little iron filings or iron shavings, they melt in between the steel layers, and yeah, just make the weld a lot easier and give me a little bit more confidence. Now, like I mentioned in the very beginning, the very intro of this video, this build was full of a lot of challenges, and although I went through the forging fairly quickly, the forging was one of the bigger challenges. It was just a lot of material to move, and doing it all by hand was pretty challenging. But I think it'll be worth it in the end. The wrought iron should look really cool. It should have a lot of character, and Sanmai always looks cool. Although for me, Sanmai, for whatever reason, it's one of the more challenging ways to make a knife. I don't know why. I've had trouble building it in the past. I was actually on Forged in Fire, and this challenge for the show was Sanmai, and I epically screwed it up. So you could go watch that sometime if you want. Day 4, and I'm ready to start beveling. Now, right now it looks like a Viking sax, and that's called a preform. Basically, it's going to be a curvy, cool, elven blade shape, but before it's all curvy and cool, you've got to set yourself up and anticipate what the material is going to do before you bevel it. And so what I did was forge the edge straight, even though it's going to curve, in anticipation of the steel curving away as I bevel it. I got a little stub welded on for my tang. Just use the MIG welder, just like an elf would use. And I sprinkled a little flux on just in case there's any issues. Who knows? But totally a Tolkien accurate way to put a tang on a knife. Use a MIG welder. And now we're getting into beveling. So I'm using the cross peen to pull some width out of the blade. I'm at about 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches at the widest part, but I want this to be over 2 inches at the widest part. Now, the widest part of the blade I want to be where the break happens, where the break of the false edge happens. Anytime I'm working on an integral knife, I saw a video of Jason Knight using the vise to knock the bolster and the tang into alignment with the spine, and I just thought that was genius. So I've done it since then. Heading into the heat treat, and the heat treat consists of normalizing, quenching, and tempering. And what I'm doing right now is called the normalizing or thermal cycling. That first heat was at or around 1650 Fahrenheit, and I cool it in still air to black. Then 1500 and 1350, again, cooling it in the still air to black. I heat the oil up with a piece of scrap, and I quench at 1500 degrees. Now, the normalizing is really important. It resets the steel. Forging causes so much chaos inside the steel, And normalizing redistributes the carbon into an even and uniform fashion, and then it also reduces the grain size. So in the end, you've just got a much stronger knife. I went home and tempered at 400 degrees for 2 2-hour cycles, which is kind of boring to watch, so I didn't film it. Now, I am doing this voiceover outside of a coffee shop, and it's some sort of special weekend at the Air Force Academy, which is in the city I live in. So you're probably hearing some crazy background noise, and that's what it is. Anyways, what I'm doing right now is profiling the blade. That's the first step I'm doing in grinding, and that's just cleaning up the shape that I forged in. So I forged it fairly close to profile and had a little bit of grinding to do to get it nice and refined. One thing that is really important, or that I find really important in knife making, is using fresh belts. So belts get dull and they don't cut anymore, they actually just burn the material. And I don't want to overheat my steel now that it's heat treated. I want to use nice sharp belts and actually cut the steel. So it gets you to the end result faster, and also you don't have as much chance of ruining your steel. This grinder I use is a 2x48 Ameribraid grinder, and that ratchet system that you saw me adjusting there is one of the things that makes this grinder just so awesome. It keeps the belt tensioned exactly where you need it to stay, instead of counting on some sort of spring or some sort of hydraulic. It's just so much better. So that's one feature that I really love about this tool. I ground my bevels all the way up to 220 grit, and the blade is feeling light and fast. Day 6, and I split the grinding up into 2 days this time. I don't typically do that, but I was trying to take my time on this project and make something really cool. This tool I'm using is a file guide made by Bill Banky, and he makes probably the best file guides out there. Highly recommend. Woo, sweaty. Because of the shape of this tang, I'm not able to get in close enough to where I need to, and especially coming in here at the top, it's just not hitting at the right angle to be able to get this totally flat. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to use a file. It's only unfortunate because filing isn't that fun. Fortunately, I didn't quench the tang or the bolster. I don't think, at least. So it should be soft. It should be fairly easy to file, but I guess I'm about to find out. Thank goodness. Thankfully, the steel was soft. So filing's not my first choice, but it's not so bad when the steel isn't hardened. So sweaty. I was able to get 90% on the grinder, but that last bit of getting it totally flat, just couldn't reach it because of the shape of the tang and the bolster. I thought it would be fun to file the bolster too, but it wasn't. It took about 5 or 10 minutes on the grinder, whereas doing it with the file would have taken an hour. File was useful in connecting all the facets from the grinder and making it super comfortable. Integral bolster knives just look so cool to me, and they're super comfortable to hold. Super comfortable. With the bolster flat and shaped, I'm taking the blade to a Scotch-Brite belt. Not for the final finish. I'm definitely going to hand sand this blade, but it does make it a little bit smoother before going into that process. Now, this is day 7, although there was a 2-day period or 48-hour period where I soaked the blade in vinegar. And I did that to loosen the scale up. So I guess you could say this is technically day 9, but it's day 7 of active work. Now what the vinegar did was loosen the scale so that I could take it to a wire wheel and knock it off. Now I wanted to keep the forged texture, but not all the rough scale from the forge, not all the oxidation from the forge. So that's what the vinegar soaking was for. Now I got my sandpaper ready, started hand sanding, and realized I forgot to use the wire wheel. So I ran over to the metal shop and took the wire wheel to the blade. Almost died, but I got the loose scale knocked off. This left a pretty nice finish, although I will say I don't think I've arrived on the whole scale or forged finish. It's still something I'm experimenting with. As I was hand sanding, I could definitely notice a difference between the soft wrought iron and the hardened W1 tool steel. So it was interesting having the wrought iron sand a lot easier while the W1 would wear away paper a lot faster. Now, I am definitely not one to try and get every little bit out of the sandpaper. Pretty much the moment I feel it stop cutting, I move on to the next piece, just so the process doesn't take any longer than it needs to. This might seem like a waste to some, but I've sanded enough blades that I think this is the best way to do it. At least this is how I want to do it. I sanded the blade up to 600 grit, or at least the bevels. I sanded the spine and the bolster up to 400 grit. Finally, onto the handle. It's a very good way to wake up in the morning. Don't need coffee, just go almost kill yourself on the bandsaw. Thankfully, I was able to get the block cut out safely. Bandsaw here at this public makerspace is a little sketchy, so definitely not my fault. It's the bandsaw's fault. No, all that to say, be safe if you're using power tools. Thankfully, I didn't get hurt in any way, but it did sober me up real quick. I got the block rough cut out, and now I'm going to get the hole drilled in. I like to drill one hole all the way through, at least for this blade, since the tang is what's called a through tang. It's going to go all the way through the end of the handle and have a little cap of wrought iron that I'll peen the tang over. And so I drill one hole all the way through, and then I use the hand drill and carve out enough of a channel that the tang will fit through. I've used broaches in the past, but it takes so long and you end up bedding the tang in the material anyways that I've switched to just using the drill. I don't know. Maybe it's worth it to use a broach, but in my opinion, this works pretty good. I use smaller drill bits for carving out the rest of the way, just so I can get like a closer radius to the corners of the tang. Now that my tang fits all the way through, right up to the bottom of the bolster, I'm going to move on to what is probably the coolest part about integral bolster knives. And I learned this from Will Stelter. He came out to Colorado Springs to teach some classes a couple years ago. He ended up teaching me this, which was pretty sick, but it's an inset fit. So the bolster actually sits down inside of the handle material, just like a 1/16 of an inch or maybe an 1/8 of an inch for this case. And what that does is it creates a fit that there's never going to be a gap on. It's also called the museum fit. So this is something that I've done on a lot of knives since I learned that, and I think it just looks amazing. It looks like the knife kind of, like the knife and the handle are like, I don't know, they fit perfectly. So it's a way to get like what looks like an absolutely perfect fit, honestly, a lot easier than just butting two flats up against each other. Another plus is that if the wood changes, like its moisture content at all, like becomes more humid or less humid, it's not going to affect the handle fit up at all. You're never going to notice. So with the bolster bedding bolster inset complete, it's time to move on to bedding the tang. So that drill bit cutout is definitely very gappy, and this is the solution, is bedding the tang. I don't want to permanently attach the handle yet. I want to make it so that it's removable, but it goes on exactly the same. It indexes the same every time. And I get that by coating the tang in Vaseline, filling up the tang slot with epoxy, and pushing it on. Now I'm going to pop the handle off before the epoxy is fully cured, and I'll have a perfect perfect tang shaped channel inside the wood that will go on exactly the same each time. So bedding combined with the inset fit, this is an awesome way to carve a handle. And I think it just looks so cool when you pop the handle off and you got that perfect little tunnel. Absolute perfect fit. It's kind of satisfying that I have to use a mallet to put the handle on and take it off. Just means that the fit up is pretty perfect. Just getting the handle shaped and ready for some cool knotwork carving. Knotwork carving is just awesome. I've always really loved the way that it looks, specifically in my buddy David Delagardel's work at Cedar Lore Forge. He's actually the guy that got me started in the craft when I was in high school or middle school or sometime around then. I was really into the Lord of the Rings movies and books, and I wanted to see if people still made swords and knives, and so I YouTubed how to make a sword, and I found David's work. His shop was, at the time, it was called the Mad Dwarf Workshop. It was him and his buddy Andy Davis, and Andy later co-founded Cole Ironworks. Sadly passed away since then, but at the time they were making what Dave calls mythopoetic swords and knives. And they're Tolkien-inspired swords and knives and featured a lot of really cool, intricate carvings. And this is work that Dave still does, and it still inspires me. So, not work that I've done in a long time. I've definitely been more rooted in production and efficiency and making high quality work, no doubt, but not nearly as artistic as the work I was doing when I started. Now, the handle shape that I went with has a really exaggerated swell at the end. This is a chopping style blade, and so I wanted a nice swell at the end, kind of like an axe handle. So it's definitely not going to fly out of your hand when you're using it. I'm using 36 grit belts before I move on to the J-Flex flexi belts that start at 220 and I go up to 400. And these really smooth everything out and get it a lot closer to its final shape. I took the flat platen off so that it's just a slack belt, and the belt forms around the shape that I started to carve with the 36 grit earlier. Now, blackwood is a very solid wood, really stable wood, and it's got a lot of oils in it, so it kind of clogs belts up really quickly, clogs sandpaper up really quickly, but it looks so good when it's finished. The handle is just about all done being shaped. I'm going to move in and use some hand sandpaper just to fine-tune everything and get the surface ready for that carving that I want to do on it. I ended on a 400 grit belt, and I'm starting at 400 grit sandpaper. I moved up to, I think, 600 or 800 grit. And now there's some comments on some of my recent shorts saying that sanding above 400 grit is just completely pointless and it does nothing. I honestly have not really looked into it. I have no idea if that's actually true, but just from what I have seen, it definitely looks different, so I would say that it does make a difference. Dude. That is awesome. Now, what's interesting about making a knife with the kind of artistic view in mind instead of just practical view is that At this point, the knife is totally functional. It's really comfortable, and I could call it quits right here. And part of me wants to, honestly. It's really daunting thinking about doing all this knotwork carving, but I am excited to push myself and challenge myself, and hopefully my work just starts to go to the next level. That's really what I'm after here, is to make the kind of work that inspired me to start in the first place. Now, there's a smith that I really admire his work. His name is Oliver Goldschmidt, and I think he's out of Italy. And in all of his pieces, they're all really curvy and cool, and the lines just flow perfectly together. And something he does a lot is these really cool inset caps on the end, out of the same material that the blade is made of. So I'm using some wrought iron, and I've never done one of these before, but just looking at pictures, I'm guessing this is how one would go about it, is getting it shaped to the same curve as the end of the handle, and then carving out a recess, just like I did for the bolster. Now, the difference between the butt cap and the bolster is that I don't want to hammer this in at all. I was able to hammer the handle material onto the bolster and get that perfect impression, and so I got like a perfect fit for the bolster. But for this, I kind of just laid it on and traced it out with a pencil, and then started to carve away with my Dremel before moving on to chisels. Now, I don't know how thick these are supposed to be. Like I said, I've never made one before, so I'm probably shooting for about 1/16 of an inch thick in the end. The Dremel did most of the work hogging away material, and I'm just fine-tuning the borders with my carving chisels. Using chisels is effective, but can definitely make mistakes. Thank goodness I was able to find the little chip that came out and get it super glued back in. A little sketchy here as the glue was drying. It stuck more to my thumb than it did to itself, and I was able to get it back in and decided to use a little drill bit, just the round on the drill bit, just to press it down and make sure it was seated all the way in. I decided to use the Dremel and really carefully carve out the front instead of the chisel, so I didn't have that happen again. I drilled a hole through the wrought iron and rounded down the end of the tang. And the tang, like you remember, is just a piece of mild steel that I had MIG welded on and then forge welded. And so it should be nice and soft for when I want to peen the end of it over. And now that it's inset, I need to grind it down to its final thickness. Wrought iron's nice and soft, so this wasn't too bad. I used 36 grit and 120 and ended up going all the way through the grits to 400. One thing I didn't do, but I might do on the next butt cap, inset butt cap, is make it domed, make it rounded. I made this one flat, which looks nice, but I think what would make it look just a little nicer is doing domed carving kind of, or domed sculpting instead of just a flat. But this does look pretty cool. I was pretty excited at this point. With all the components for the handle done, I can start doing the final finish works of this piece. One of those is some knotwork carvings. Drawing knotwork is something that I haven't done in a long time. I did a lot of it at the beginning because I was really inspired by Dave's work, which has a lot of knotwork on it, and it was extremely challenging. I didn't show it, but I spent like 2 or 3 days just sketching up different designs before going with this. What the inspiration was for this, I honestly have no idea. I was looking at Dave's work, trying not to copy it, trying to come up with something original, and what it ended up looking like is kind of like waves, which I guess you could tie into Tolkien's elven world. They're obsessed with going to the sea, and they always sing about the sea, so we'll just say this was the knife they made for their journey to the sea. I used the Dremel to outline the carving, and I was trying to get it nice and deep. I used these little diamond coated bits, and they honestly kind of sucked. The black wood maybe is just too dense for them, too oily, and they clogged up really fast. So I probably will invest in some nicer actual burrs that will actually carve the wood out instead of just sort of clogging up like those did. With the carving started, I want to get the blade in some ferric chloride. So I actually put the blade and the butt cap in the ferric. I did about 5 times in the ferric, and in between, every 10 minutes I would clean the blade off, clean the oxides off. And after that, I was doing an instant coffee etch. So an instant coffee etch is what gives you that really nice dark black finish on the carbon steel. And so the etch out of wrought did look good, but I wanted to make the W1 part of the blade just as black as the handle. I thought that would look really nice. So I got the blade in the coffee, left it there overnight, and while it was soaking, I got the carvings finished using the hand chisels. This is the point of the project where I seriously considered just starting the handle completely over. I said day 12, but this was actually many days of work, of carving a little bit, coming back to it, carving a little bit, coming back to it. The black wood was extremely hard. Using chisels to carve it was super time consuming. I had to be really, really careful. Like when you're carving, you could catch the grain the wrong way and split the wood out. And I definitely didn't want to do that at this point. So I carved for as long as I could possibly stand it. And I don't know if it ended up perfect, but it did end up looking pretty cool. So with the carving finally done, the etching done, I'm ready to assemble this piece. All the different components, forging the blade out, the wrought iron billet by hand, doing the inset fits, doing the knotwork carvings, all those things combined, and the blade not being culinary, which is really where my focus and skill has grown the most. This was an incredibly challenging build, but it was exciting to be at the end of it, be able to assemble the whole thing, and kind of see this vision that I had in my head come to life. I'm not using a lot of epoxy for this part of the process. The tang is already almost a perfect fit, or it is a perfect fit. So I just need a little bit in there, but then also peening the end of the tang over really sets this thing up for good. That mild steel smushed over really nice and easy. And this thing looks wicked. Last thing to do is get an edge on this blade. Super curvy, recurved edge. You can't use a flat stone, so I'm using my belt and using this slack belt to get a burr established. Use a strop to break it off. I've got a pretty sharp edge. It definitely chop some works up. Pretty sharp. I don't have any works to go chop up, so I chopped up water bottles. And here it is, the finished piece. Overall, I love this thing. I think it's super cool. Did a lot of new stuff on this piece. Pushed myself like crazy, but I think it came out pretty awesome. If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you're here. Hope this encourages you, if you've been thinking about getting into bladesmithing, to just get out there and try it. Go make the cool stuff that you think about. This is definitely the start of me doing the kind of work that I started in the first place. Really stoked with this overall. And I'll see you guys in the next video.